The wedding photograph that would become evidence in a criminal investigation was taken on June 15, 2024, at a small chapel in Coral Springs, Florida, showing Marie-Claire Toussaint in a simple white dress, her eyes bright with hope and dreams of the American life she had worked so hard to build since arriving from Port-au-Prince 2 years earlier, standing beside Daniel White, the construction foreman who had promised to love and protect her forever, though within 72 hours of their marriage ceremony, those same hands that had slipped a ring onto her finger would leave bruises on her arms that would force her to confront the devastating reality that the man she had married was not the loving partner she believed him to be. The transformation from fairy tale romance to nightmare began during their honeymoon weekend at a modest beach resort in Key Largo, when Daniel's discovery of text messages from Marie-Claire's former boyfriend in Haiti triggered an explosive rage that revealed patterns of jealousy, control, and violence that had been carefully concealed during their 6-month courtship period, when he had presented himself as the stable, caring American husband who would provide the security and respectability that her immigration status and cultural background made so essential for her future success. Marie-Claire's journey to America had been motivated by the same dreams that brought thousands of young Haitian women to Florida each year: the hope of educational opportunities, economic advancement, and the chance to build a life free from the poverty and instability that had defined her childhood in Port-au-Prince, where her mother, Sophia Toussaint, worked as a seamstress to support their family, while encouraging Marie-Claire to pursue nursing training that would provide her with professional skills and financial independence in whatever country she chose to call home. The nursing aide position that Marie-Claire had secured at Sunset Manor Nursing Home represented not only her first stable employment in America, but also her entry into a social network of immigrant women who shared similar experiences of cultural adaptation and the challenges of building new lives while maintaining connections to their families and traditions in Haiti, creating friendships that provided both practical support and emotional validation during the difficult process of establishing herself in Florida's competitive healthcare industry. The relationship that developed between Marie-Claire and Daniel had begun at a community barbecue organized by her church, where his attention and apparent respect for her cultural background and professional aspirations had distinguished him from other men who seemed primarily interested in her physical appearance rather than her intelligence and ambitions, leading to a courtship that had progressed through carefully supervised social activities and family introductions that followed traditional patterns familiar to Marie-Claire from her upbringing in Haiti. Daniel's presentation of himself as a successful construction foreman with steady employment and plans for homeownership had appealed to Marie-Claire's practical nature and her understanding that marriage to an American citizen would provide her with immigration security, while also fulfilling cultural expectations about finding a husband who could provide financial stability and social respectability within both the Haitian American community and broader American society that she was working to join. The pressure that Marie-Claire felt to marry and establish herself within American society was intensified by her awareness that her temporary immigration status could be jeopardized by changes in policy or personal circumstances that might force her to return to Haiti, where economic opportunities for educated women remained limited, and her investment in American education and training would provide little practical benefit for building the career and lifestyle she had sacrificed so much to pursue. The warning signs that had been present during their courtship, but dismissed as cultural differences or normal relationship adjustments, included Daniel's questions about her previous relationships, his comments about appropriate behavior for married women, and his subtle attempts to influence her work schedule and social activities in ways that would increase her dependence on him while limiting her connections to friends and colleagues who might provide alternative perspectives about healthy relationship dynamics. The marriage ceremony itself had been a modest affair, attended by a few colleagues from Marie-Claire's workplace and some of Daniel's family members, reflecting their mutual preference for privacy and their focus on beginning their married life without the extensive celebrations that might have been expected in Haiti, but seemed inappropriate given their limited finances and Daniel's stated preference for keeping their personal business private from extended family members and community connections. The honeymoon that was intended to be a romantic celebration of their new marriage became the setting for Marie-Claire's first experience of Daniel's capacity for violence, when his discovery of innocent text messages from her past triggered accusations of infidelity and disrespect that escalated into physical aggression that left her shocked, frightened, and completely unprepared for the reality that the man she had married was capable of using violence to enforce his expectations about wifely obedience and submission. The isolation that Marie-Claire experienced during that first weekend of marriage was compounded by her recognition that she had no immediate support system or resources for addressing domestic violence, particularly as a recent immigrant whose understanding of American legal systems and social services was limited and whose cultural background had not prepared her for navigating the complex dynamics of reporting intimate partner abuse within a marriage that was supposed to provide her with security and stability. The return to their apartment after the honeymoon marked the beginning of a pattern of escalating control and intimidation that would characterize their brief marriage, as Daniel began implementing rules about Marie-Claire's behavior, appearance, and social interactions that were presented as normal expectations for married couples, but represented systematic efforts to isolate her from potential sources of support while establishing his dominance over every aspect of her daily life and personal autonomy. The first incident of serious domestic violence occurred just 5 days after Marie-Claire and Daniel returned from their honeymoon, when his demands that she quit her job at the nursing home to focus on household duties triggered an argument that escalated into physical assault, leaving Marie-Claire with facial bruises that she would attempt to conceal with makeup while struggling to understand how the man she had married could transform so quickly from loving husband to violent aggressor who seemed determined to control every aspect of her existence. The psychological impact of Daniel's violence was intensified by Marie-Claire's recognition that she had no immediate escape options or support resources, as her immigration status remained dependent on their marriage and her limited savings provided insufficient funds for independent housing, while her isolation from family in Haiti meant that she could not easily seek help from relatives who might have provided both emotional support and practical assistance during this crisis period. Angela Ramirez, Marie-Claire's closest friend and colleague at Sunset Manor, became the first person to notice the changes in Marie-Claire's behavior and appearance that suggested she might be experiencing domestic abuse. Though Marie-Claire's initial attempts to minimize and explain away her injuries reflected both her shame about the violence and her fear that reporting Daniel's behavior might jeopardize her immigration status and force her to return to Haiti, where she would face social stigma and economic hardship. The escalation of Daniel's controlling behavior included demands that Marie-Claire account for every hour of her day, surrender her cell phone for his inspection, and obtain his permission before making any purchases or social plans, creating a prison-like environment within their marriage that systematically stripped away her autonomy and independence, while making her increasingly dependent on his approval and financial support for basic survival needs. The cultural isolation that Marie-Claire experienced was compounded by Daniel's explicit prohibitions on her participation in Haitian cultural events and religious activities that had provided her with community connection and spiritual support during her first 2 years in America, leaving her cut off from the cultural networks that had helped her maintain her identity and emotional well-being while adapting to American society and building her professional career. The financial control that Daniel exercised over their household included taking possession of Marie-Claire's paychecks, limiting her access to bank accounts, and requiring detailed justifications for any expenditures, creating economic dependency that made it practically impossible for her to leave the marriage, even as his violence and intimidation became more frequent and severe, trapping her in a relationship that had become psychologically and physically dangerous. The workplace monitoring that Daniel implemented included surprise visits to Marie-Claire's nursing home job, interrogations about her interactions with male colleagues and patients, and demands that she provide detailed reports about her daily activities and conversations, creating additional stress and professional embarrassment that threatened her employment and career prospects, while also isolating her from potential sources of support and assistance. Angela's growing concern about Marie-Claire's situation led her to research domestic violence, resources, and legal protections available to immigrant women, though her attempts to discuss these options were met with Marie-Claire's fearful resistance and her insistence that the violence was temporary and that Daniel would change his behavior if she could learn to be a better wife who met his expectations and avoided triggering his anger. The pattern of violence that emerged during their first month of marriage followed classic domestic abuse cycles, including periods of explosive rage, followed by tearful apologies and promises to change, creating psychological confusion for Marie Claire, who desperately wanted to believe that her marriage could be saved through her own behavioral modifications and Daniel's claimed remorse about his actions. The isolation strategy that Daniel employed included systematic efforts to damage Marie Claire's relationships with colleagues and friends through false accusations about her character and behavior, creating social conflicts that further limited her support network while reinforcing his narrative that she was untrustworthy and needed his constant supervision and control to maintain appropriate moral and social behavior. The documentation that Angela began encouraging Marie Claire to maintain included photographs of injuries, records of incidents, and copies of threatening messages, though Marie Claire's reluctance to create evidence that might be used in legal proceedings reflected her continued hope that their marriage could be repaired and her fear that taking action against Daniel might result in deportation or other immigration consequences that would destroy her American dreams. The intervention attempt that Angela organized through their Workplace Employee Assistance Program provided Marie Claire with information about domestic violence, resources, and legal protections, though the complexity of immigration law and her limited understanding of American legal systems created additional barriers to seeking help, while Daniel's increasing surveillance of her activities made it dangerous for her to access support services or communicate with potential advocates. The turning point in Marie Claire's situation came when Daniel's violence escalated to strangulation during an argument about her refusal to quit her nursing job, creating the first life-threatening assault that forced her to recognize that her marriage had become a deadly trap and that his promises of change were lies designed to maintain control, while his actual behavior continued to deteriorate toward potentially fatal violence that required immediate intervention and escape planning. The medical attention that Marie Claire sought at a local emergency room following the strangulation incident provided healthcare workers with their first opportunity to document her injuries and offer domestic violence resources, though her initial reluctance to identify Daniel as her attacker reflected both her fear of retaliation and her continued confusion about whether she bore some responsibility for triggering his violent behavior through her failure to meet his expectations. Angela's decision to contact domestic violence advocates on Marie Claire's behalf represented a crucial intervention that connected her with specialized services for immigrant victims, including legal advocates who could explain her rights and options under both criminal and immigration law, while providing culturally competent support that respected her Haitian background and understood the unique challenges faced by women whose abusers exploited their immigration status to maintain control. The safety planning that domestic violence counselors developed with Marie Claire included strategies for documenting abuse, securing important documents, establishing emergency contacts, and creating escape routes that could be implemented quickly if Daniel's violence escalated further, though the complexity of her situation required careful coordination between multiple agencies and service providers to address both her immediate safety needs and long-term immigration concerns. The legal consultation that Marie Claire received through victim advocacy services revealed that domestic violence victims were eligible for special immigration protections under federal law, including the possibility of obtaining legal status independent of their abusive spouse, though the application process was complex and required extensive documentation of abuse that Marie Claire had been reluctant to collect due to her hope that their marriage might be saved through counseling and behavioral changes. Detective John Miller's involvement in Marie Claire's case began when hospital social workers filed a mandatory report about her strangulation injuries, triggering a criminal investigation that revealed Daniel's history of domestic violence in previous relationships that had never been prosecuted due to victims' reluctance to testify or their relocation to avoid continued abuse, establishing a pattern of escalating violence that made Marie Claire's situation particularly dangerous. The background investigation into Daniel's romantic history revealed 3 previous relationships that had ended due to domestic violence, including one ex-girlfriend who had been hospitalized with severe injuries, and another who had obtained a restraining order that Daniel had violated multiple times, demonstrating that his abusive behavior was systematic and likely to continue escalating regardless of marriage counseling or other intervention efforts. The arrest warrant that was issued for Daniel, based on Marie Claire's hospital records and witness testimony, provided her with temporary relief from his physical presence, though his release on bail created new safety concerns that required enhanced security measures, including relocation to a confidential shelter address and coordination with her workplace to provide protection during her shifts at the nursing home. The criminal proceedings that followed Daniel's arrest were complicated by Marie Claire's conflicted feelings about testifying against her husband, as cultural expectations about marriage loyalty conflicted with her growing recognition that her survival required legal intervention, creating internal psychological conflict that required specialized counseling to address trauma bonding and the complex emotions associated with prosecuting someone she had loved and married. The victim advocacy work that supported Marie Claire through the legal process included assistance with immigration applications, coordination with criminal prosecutors, and ongoing counseling to address the psychological trauma of domestic abuse, while also providing practical support for housing, employment, and financial stability that would enable her to rebuild her life independently of Daniel's control and violence. The community response from Marie Claire's Haitian cultural network was mixed, with some members providing support and validation, while others expressed concern about the impact of her divorce and criminal prosecution on community reputation and her own marriage prospects, reflecting cultural tensions between traditional expectations about marriage preservation and contemporary understanding of domestic violence as a serious crime requiring legal intervention. The workplace support that Marie Claire received from her nursing home colleagues included flexible scheduling to accommodate court appearances, emotional support during the prosecution process, and practical assistance with transportation and childcare that enabled her to maintain her employment while participating in legal proceedings that were essential for both her safety and her immigration status. The criminal trial that began 6 months after Daniel's arrest provided Marie Claire with her first opportunity to confront her abuser in a legal setting where his violence would be officially recognized and punished, though the proceedings were emotionally challenging as defense attorneys attempted to minimize the severity of his actions while portraying Marie Claire as a vindictive immigrant who was exploiting the legal system to gain immigration benefits through false accusations. The prosecution's presentation of evidence included medical records documenting Marie Claire's injuries, photographs of her bruises and strangulation marks, testimony from hospital staff and domestic violence advocates, and expert testimony about the escalating patterns of intimate partner violence that demonstrated the serious nature of Daniel's crimes and the significant danger he posed to future partners if his behavior was not addressed through criminal consequences. The testimony that Marie Claire provided about her abuse was emotionally devastating but legally crucial, as she described the systematic control and intimidation that had characterized their brief marriage, while also explaining how her cultural background and immigration status had made her particularly vulnerable to Daniel's manipulation and threats about reporting her to immigration authorities if she sought help or tried to leave their relationship. The defense strategy attempted to portray Daniel as a man who had been deceived about Marie Claire's background and previous relationships, claiming that his violence was an understandable response to her alleged dishonesty, rather than systematic abuse designed to establish control and dominance, though this approach was undermined by evidence of his similar behavior in previous relationships and expert testimony about domestic violence dynamics. The expert witnesses who testified about domestic violence patterns explained how abusers often targeted vulnerable partners, including immigrants who might be less likely to report abuse due to language barriers, cultural factors, or immigration concerns, while also describing the psychological impact of intimate partner violence and the reasons why victims might initially be reluctant to seek help or leave abusive relationships. The victim impact statement that Marie Claire prepared for the sentencing phase documented not only her physical injuries but also the psychological trauma and life disruption caused by Daniel's abuse, including her loss of trust in relationships, ongoing anxiety and depression, and the financial costs associated with medical treatment, legal proceedings, and the need to rebuild her life after experiencing systematic violence and control. The jury's unanimous guilty verdict on charges of domestic violence, strangulation, and intimidation reflected their conclusion that the evidence overwhelmingly proved Daniel's systematic abuse of Marie Claire and their recognition that his violence represented a serious threat to public safety that required substantial criminal consequences to protect both Marie Claire and other potential victims from similar abuse. The sentencing hearing revealed additional information about Daniel's psychological profile and his history of targeting vulnerable women, with probation officers recommending a substantial prison sentence based on the severity of his crimes and his lack of genuine remorse or acceptance of responsibility for the comprehensive harm he had caused through his systematic abuse and violence. The 8-year prison sentence that Daniel received was longer than typical for first-time domestic violence convictions, reflecting the judge's recognition of the premeditated nature of his abuse and the particular vulnerability of his victim as an immigrant woman whose status he had exploited to maintain control and prevent her from seeking help, while also serving as a deterrent message about the serious consequences of intimate partner violence. The protective order that was issued as part of Daniel's sentence included permanent prohibitions on contact with Marie Claire and requirements for anger management and domestic violence counseling that would be mandatory. The conditions of his eventual parole, though advocates noted that such orders provided only limited protection and that Marie Claire would need ongoing safety planning and support to protect herself from potential retaliation. The immigration relief that Marie Claire received through the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, provided her with legal status independent of her marriage to Daniel, recognizing that domestic violence victims should not be forced to remain with abusive spouses to maintain their immigration status. Though the application process was complex and required extensive documentation and legal assistance to navigate successfully, the civil litigation that Marie Claire pursued against Daniel sought compensation for her medical expenses, lost wages, and psychological treatment costs, though recovery was limited by his modest assets and his incarceration, highlighting the reality that many domestic violence victims faced ongoing financial hardship despite successful criminal prosecutions of their abusers. The recovery process that Marie Claire undertook following Daniel's conviction required intensive psychological counseling to address post-traumatic stress disorder and the complex trauma associated with intimate partner violence, while also rebuilding her sense of personal autonomy and self-worth that had been systematically undermined through months of abuse and control that had affected every aspect of her daily life and future planning. The therapy that Marie Claire participated in included both individual counseling to process her trauma and group sessions with other domestic violence survivors that provided peer support and validation of her experiences, while also offering practical strategies for rebuilding relationships and maintaining safety in future partnerships, though progress was slow due to the severity of trauma bonding and the cultural conflicts she experienced about divorce and independence. The workplace reintegration that Marie Claire accomplished with support from her colleagues at Sunset Manor included adjustments to her schedule and responsibilities that accommodated her court appearances and therapy appointments, while also providing her with the stable employment and professional identity that were essential for her financial independence and psychological recovery from the systematic control she had experienced during her marriage. The immigration case that Marie Claire pursued under VAWA provisions required extensive documentation of her abuse and comprehensive legal representation to navigate complex federal regulations, though the successful outcome provided her with permanent legal status that eliminated her vulnerability to deportation and enabled her to plan for long-term goals, including education and career advancement that had been interrupted by her abusive marriage. The family relationships that Marie Claire worked to rebuild included regular communication with her mother Sophia in Haiti, who had been devastated to learn about the domestic violence and had struggled with guilt about encouraging her daughter's marriage to an American man who had seemed to offer security and respectability, but had actually represented deadly danger that had nearly cost Marie Claire her life. The community connections that Marie Claire gradually reestablished within the Haitian American community in South Florida were complicated by cultural attitudes about divorce and domestic violence that made some community members judgmental about her decision to prosecute her husband, though others provided support and validation while working to change traditional attitudes that might prevent other women from seeking help for intimate partner abuse. The advocacy work that Marie Claire eventually undertook included sharing her story with domestic violence organizations and immigrant rights groups to educate others about the warning signs of abuse and the resources available for victims, particularly immigrant women, who might face additional barriers to seeking help due to language differences, cultural factors, and concerns about immigration consequences. The financial rebuilding that Marie Claire accomplished through careful budgeting and additional training programs enabled her to achieve economic independence, while also building savings that provided security and confidence in her ability to support herself without dependence on a romantic partner, representing a crucial aspect of her psychological recovery from the systematic financial control she had experienced during her marriage. The dating relationships that Marie Claire eventually considered were approached with extreme caution and extensive support from her therapist and domestic violence advocates, as she worked to develop healthy boundaries and communication skills while learning to recognize warning signs of controlling or manipulative behavior that might indicate potential for future abuse or violence. The housing stability that Marie Claire achieved through subsidized programs for domestic violence survivors provided her with a safe and affordable apartment where she could continue her recovery while maintaining the privacy and security that were essential for her ongoing healing process and protection from potential retaliation by Daniel or his associates, who might pose continued threats to her safety. The career advancement that Marie Claire pursued through additional nursing education and certifications represented her commitment to building professional skills and financial independence that would provide long-term security while also fulfilling her original dreams of educational achievement and career success that had motivated her immigration to America before her abusive marriage temporarily derailed these goals. The legal monitoring that continued throughout Daniel's incarceration included regular updates about his status and potential parole hearings that would require Marie Claire's input about ongoing safety concerns and the need for continued protective measures, recognizing that domestic violence cases often required long-term vigilance and support to protect survivors from continued threats and retaliation by their former abusers. The victim advocacy organization that Marie Claire helped establish 3 years after Daniel's conviction provided specialized services for immigrant domestic violence survivors, recognizing that this population faced unique challenges including language barriers, cultural isolation, and immigration concerns that required culturally competent intervention and support services that understood the intersection of domestic violence with cultural expectations and legal vulnerabilities. The public speaking engagements that Marie Claire undertook to raise awareness about domestic violence in immigrant communities were emotionally challenging but professionally rewarding, as she shared her story with healthcare workers, law enforcement officers, and community organizations to help them better recognize and respond to intimate partner abuse while reducing the stigma that prevented many victims from seeking help. The policy advocacy work that emerged from Marie Claire's case included efforts to strengthen legal protections for immigrant domestic violence victims, improve training for law enforcement officers responding to intimate partner violence calls, and enhance coordination between criminal justice and immigration systems to ensure that victims' safety remained the primary priority, regardless of their citizenship status or cultural background. The research collaboration that Marie Claire participated in with academic institutions studying domestic violence in immigrant communities provided valuable data about the unique risk factors and protective factors that influence outcomes for survivors, while also contributing to the development of evidence-based intervention strategies that could be adapted for different cultural communities and immigration contexts. The mentorship program that Marie Claire developed for young Haitian women provided education about healthy relationships, warning signs of abuse, and available resources for victims, while also addressing cultural factors that might make women vulnerable to exploitation by partners who understood how to manipulate traditional expectations about marriage and family relationships for controlling and abusive purposes. The continuing education that Marie Claire pursued in nursing administration and healthcare management represented her commitment to professional advancement while also providing her with skills and credentials that enhanced her economic security and career prospects, demonstrating that domestic violence survivors could rebuild and exceed their previous accomplishments despite the trauma and disruption they had experienced. The international connections that Marie Claire maintained with domestic violence organizations in Haiti provided opportunities to share resources and strategies for supporting survivors in both countries, while also raising awareness about the global nature of intimate partner violence and the need for coordinated responses that addressed both local cultural factors and universal human rights principles. The legal expertise that Marie Claire developed through her advocacy work enabled her to assist other survivors in navigating complex legal systems, while also providing testimony in legislative hearings and policy development, processes that influenced improvements in legal protections and support services for domestic violence victims, particularly those from immigrant and refugee communities. The therapeutic innovations that emerged from Marie Claire's recovery process contributed to enhanced understanding of cultural trauma and its intersection with intimate partner violence, providing mental health professionals with culturally competent approaches for supporting survivors while respecting their cultural identity and addressing the specific challenges associated with cross-cultural abuse and recovery. The community healing initiatives that Marie Claire supported included cultural competency training for domestic violence service providers, development of multilingual resources and materials, and efforts to engage religious and community leaders in prevention and response efforts that honored traditional values while protecting women and families from violence and abuse. The ongoing safety planning that remained part of Marie Claire's life included regular security assessments and updates to protective measures that addressed the continued risk posed by Daniel's eventual release from prison, recognizing that domestic violence cases often required long-term vigilance and support to ensure survivor safety and prevent retaliation or renewed abuse. The relationship counseling that Marie Claire eventually participated in with her current partner addressed the impact of her previous trauma on her ability to trust and form intimate relationships, while also providing both partners with tools and strategies for maintaining healthy communication and boundaries that honored her need for safety and autonomy, while supporting their mutual goals for partnership and family development. The 7-year follow-up assessment of Marie Claire's recovery revealed remarkable progress in all areas of her life, including completion of nursing management, education, establishment of a stable romantic relationship with appropriate boundaries and mutual respect, and continued advocacy work that had influenced policy changes and service improvements for domestic violence survivors, particularly immigrant women who faced intersecting vulnerabilities related to their cultural background and legal status. The marriage that Marie Claire eventually entered with Jean-Paul Silvestre, a Haitian-American social worker who understood and respected her trauma history, represented a healthy partnership based on equality, communication, and mutual support rather than the control and dominance that had characterized her first marriage, demonstrating that intimate partner violence survivors could develop healthy relationships despite their previous traumatic experiences. The children that Marie Claire and Jean-Paul welcomed into their family were raised with awareness of healthy relationship dynamics and respect for women's autonomy, while also being taught about their Haitian cultural heritage and the importance of standing against violence and injustice in all forms, creating the next generation of advocates and leaders who would continue working to prevent domestic violence and support survivors. The professional achievements that Marie Claire accomplished included promotion to nursing supervisor at a major Miami hospital, completion of graduate education in healthcare administration, and recognition as a community leader whose advocacy work had contributed to significant improvements in services and protections for domestic violence survivors, while also maintaining her connections to the Haitian American community and her commitment to cultural preservation. The nonprofit organization that Marie Claire founded to support immigrant domestic violence survivors had grown to serve hundreds of women annually, while also providing training and consultation to other service providers throughout Florida and nationally, demonstrating the lasting impact that individual survivors could have when they transformed their personal experiences into systematic advocacy and service delivery. The policy achievements that resulted from Marie Claire's advocacy work included enhanced funding for culturally competent domestic violence services, improved training requirements for law enforcement officers and healthcare workers, and strengthened legal protections for immigrant victims that addressed the intersection of domestic violence with immigration status and cultural factors that could be exploited by abusive partners. The international recognition that Marie Claire received for her advocacy work included speaking engagements at conferences and universities throughout the Americas, where she shared insights about effective interventions for domestic violence in immigrant communities, while also building networks of advocates and service providers who could share resources and strategies across national boundaries. The research contributions that Marie Claire made through collaboration with academic institutions provided valuable data about long-term recovery outcomes for domestic violence survivors, while also informing the development of evidence-based practices that could improve service delivery and support more effective healing and empowerment processes for survivors from diverse cultural backgrounds and immigration experiences. The monitoring of Daniel's prison sentence and eventual parole process required ongoing coordination with law enforcement and victim services to ensure that appropriate safety measures remained in place. Though Marie Claire's growth and empowerment over the years had provided her with confidence and resources to protect herself, while also maintaining her commitment to helping other survivors navigate similar challenges. The community transformation that had occurred in response to Marie Claire's advocacy work included increased awareness about domestic violence warning signs, enhanced support for survivors, and evolving attitudes about the intersection of cultural traditions with contemporary understanding of women's rights and safety, creating lasting changes that would benefit future generations of immigrant women and families. The educational initiatives that Marie Claire supported included development of curricula for schools and community organizations that addressed healthy relationships and domestic violence prevention, while also honoring cultural diversity and traditional values that promoted family stability and community cohesion without tolerating violence or abuse against women and children. The ongoing evaluation of programs and policies that had been influenced by Marie Claire's advocacy demonstrated measurable improvements in survivor outcomes and system responses to domestic violence, while also revealing areas where additional work was needed to address emerging challenges and ensure that services remained accessible and effective for diverse populations with varying needs and circumstances. The 10-year commemoration of Marie Claire's escape from domestic violence marked a significant milestone in ongoing efforts to address intimate partner abuse in immigrant communities, with measurable improvements in prevention capabilities, law enforcement responses, and victim support services that had been directly influenced by lessons learned from her case and the advocacy work that had emerged from her traumatic but ultimately transformative experience. The comprehensive impact assessment revealed that education and awareness programs developed in response to cases like Marie Claire's had successfully prevented an estimated 200 domestic violence escalations among immigrant women in South Florida, while also improving early intervention and support services that helped victims access help before their situations became life-threatening, potentially saving lives and preventing serious injuries. The victim advocacy movement that had grown from Marie Claire's experience achieved significant policy victories, including enhanced legal protections for immigrant domestic violence victims, improved coordination between criminal justice and immigration systems, and better funding for culturally competent support services that addressed the unique challenges faced by survivors from diverse cultural backgrounds and immigration experiences. The International Conference on Domestic Violence and Immigration that was organized annually in Marie Claire's honor brought together researchers, practitioners, survivors, and policymakers from throughout the Americas to share knowledge and develop more effective approaches to preventing intimate partner abuse while supporting survivors through comprehensive recovery processes that respected their cultural identity and promoted their long-term empowerment and success. The academic research programs that had been funded to study cases like Marie Claire's continued to produce valuable findings about the intersection of domestic violence with immigration status and cultural factors, while also training new generations of practitioners and researchers who were equipped with enhanced understanding of cultural competency and trauma-informed approaches to supporting survivors from diverse backgrounds. The technology innovations that had been developed to support domestic violence survivors included multilingual mobile applications that provided safety planning tools and resource information, secure communication platforms that enabled survivors to access help while maintaining privacy, and enhanced coordination systems that improved information sharing between service providers while protecting survivor confidentiality and safety. The policy achievements that resulted from advocacy efforts inspired by Marie Claire's experience included federal legislation strengthening protections for immigrant victims, state-level improvements in law enforcement training and response protocols, and local initiatives that enhanced coordination between domestic violence services and immigration legal assistance, creating comprehensive support systems that address survivors' multiple needs. The community transformation that had occurred in South Florida's Haitian American community included reduced stigma around discussing domestic violence, enhanced awareness about available resources and legal protections, and evolving attitudes about the balance between cultural traditions and contemporary understanding of women's rights and safety that honored heritage while protecting vulnerable community members from abuse. The therapeutic innovations that had emerged from treating survivors like Marie Claire contributed to enhanced understanding of cultural trauma and its intersection with intimate partner violence, providing mental health professionals with evidence-based approaches for supporting recovery while respecting cultural identity and addressing the complex psychological impact of abuse that occurred within culturally significant relationship contexts. The prevention programs that continued to operate in Marie Claire's honor reached thousands of individuals through comprehensive education initiatives that promoted healthy relationship dynamics, while addressing cultural factors that might increase vulnerability to abuse, creating sustainable changes in community attitudes and behaviors that reduced risk factors while strengthening protective factors for women and families. The ongoing support network that had been established for domestic violence survivors provided comprehensive services, including crisis intervention, legal advocacy, housing assistance, and long-term empowerment programs that addressed both immediate safety needs and long-term goals for independence and success, while also maintaining connections with survivors like Marie Claire, who served as mentors and advocates for others. The legacy projects that continued to honor Marie Claire's experience included scholarship programs for survivors pursuing higher education, research initiatives examining best practices in culturally competent domestic violence services, and advocacy organizations working to eliminate intimate partner abuse through comprehensive approaches that addressed individual, relationship, community, and societal factors that contributed to violence against women. The 15-year legacy assessment of interventions developed in response to Marie Claire's case demonstrated remarkable progress in protecting immigrant women from domestic violence with comprehensive prevention programs, enhanced law enforcement capabilities, and victim support services that had collectively prevented thousands of abuse incidents while providing meaningful assistance and recovery support for those who had experienced intimate partner violence within culturally complex contexts. The survivor advocacy organization that Marie Claire had founded continued to operate as a leading provider of culturally competent domestic violence services while also influencing policy development and professional training throughout the region, demonstrating how individual survivor experiences could be transformed into systematic social change that benefited entire communities and vulnerable populations who might otherwise lack adequate protection and support. The research legacy of Marie Claire's case continued through ongoing academic studies that examined the effectiveness of different intervention approaches, while also training new generations of practitioners and researchers understood the complex intersection of domestic violence with cultural factors, immigration status, and community dynamics that required specialized knowledge and skills to address effectively. The international cooperation that had been developed for supporting immigrant domestic violence survivors continued to facilitate knowledge sharing and resource development across national boundaries, creating networks of advocates and service providers who could coordinate responses to intimate partner abuse that crossed cultural and geographic boundaries, while respecting local contexts and legal frameworks. The policy influence of advocacy efforts, inspired by Marie Claire's experience, extended to federal immigration reforms that strengthened protections for abuse victims, while also supporting state and local initiatives that improved coordination between criminal justice systems and support services to ensure that survivors received comprehensive assistance that addressed their safety, legal status, and long-term empowerment needs. The community healing that had occurred within immigrant communities as a result of increased awareness and improved services demonstrated the possibility of cultural change that honored traditional values while protecting vulnerable community members from abuse, creating models that could be adapted for other cultural communities and geographic regions facing similar challenges. The technological solutions that continued to evolve in response to domestic violence included advanced safety planning applications, secure communication platforms, and improved coordination systems that enhanced service delivery while protecting survivor, privacy, and safety. demonstrating how innovation could support both prevention and response efforts in culturally appropriate and accessible ways. The educational impact of Marie Claire's story reached hundreds of thousands of individuals through various media, training programs, and community initiatives that raised awareness about domestic violence, while reducing stigma and promoting help-seeking behavior among potential victims and their families, friends, and community members who might be positioned to offer support and assistance. The ongoing evaluation of prevention and intervention strategies revealed both successes and challenges in addressing domestic violence within immigrant communities, highlighting the importance of sustained commitment to comprehensive approaches that addressed individual trauma, while also working to change social and cultural factors that enabled abuse to occur and continue without adequate response. 20 years after Marie Claire Toussaint married the man she believed would provide her with security and love in her new American life, only to discover that Daniel White was a violent abuser who nearly killed her before she found the courage to escape and seek justice, her story continues to serve as a powerful reminder of how domestic violence can destroy lives, while also demonstrating the possibility of survival, recovery, and transformation that honors both individual resilience and community support. The comprehensive impact of Marie Claire's advocacy work can be measured not only in the policies changed and services created, but also in the thousands of women who have been protected from abuse, supported through recovery, and empowered to rebuild their lives with dignity and hope, while also contributing to broader cultural transformation that honored traditional values while protecting vulnerable community members from violence and exploitation. The victim support services that continued to operate in Marie Claire's honor provided comprehensive assistance, including crisis intervention, legal advocacy, immigration support, and long-term empowerment programs that address the complex intersection of domestic violence with cultural factors and immigration status, creating models for culturally competent service delivery that could be adapted for diverse communities and populations. The prevention initiatives that had been developed based on lessons learned from Marie Claire's experience reached millions of individuals through education programs, community outreach, and professional training that promoted healthy relationship dynamics while addressing risk factors that might make individuals vulnerable to intimate partner abuse, creating sustainable changes in attitudes and behaviors that reduced violence while strengthening protective community responses. The international influence of Marie Claire's advocacy work extended throughout the Americas and beyond, contributing to policy reforms and service improvements that protected immigrant women from domestic violence, while also demonstrating the possibility of transforming personal trauma into meaningful social change that honored both individual healing and collective empowerment for vulnerable populations. The research contributions that emerged from studying Marie Claire's recovery and advocacy work continued to inform evidence-based practices for supporting domestic violence survivors, while also advancing understanding of the complex factors that contributed to resilience and empowerment following traumatic experiences, providing valuable insights for practitioners, researchers, and policymakers working to address intimate partner abuse. The community healing that had occurred in response to Marie Claire's case demonstrated the possibility of cultural change that balanced respect for traditional values with contemporary understanding of women's rights, safety, creating frameworks for addressing domestic violence that honored cultural diversity while maintaining zero tolerance for abuse and violence against women and families. The ongoing impact of Marie Claire's story extended beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in law enforcement training, healthcare response protocols, and community awareness that continued to evolve in response to emerging challenges while maintaining focus on survivor, safety, and empowerment as the primary goals of all intervention and support efforts. The legacy of Marie Claire Toussaint lives on through the countless women who have been protected by enhanced domestic violence prevention and response systems developed in response to her experience, the survivors who have received support through services established in her honor, and the broader understanding of how cultural factors and immigration status intersect with intimate partner violence to create complex vulnerabilities requiring specialized and comprehensive intervention. Her story serves as a permanent reminder that while domestic violence can affect anyone, regardless of background or circumstances, Immigrant women face particular vulnerabilities that require culturally competent and legally informed responses that address both immediate safety needs and long-term empowerment goals, while also working to change social conditions that enable abuse to occur and continue without adequate community response. The prevention and support programs that continue to evolve based on lessons learned from Marie Claire's case ensure that her suffering was not in vain, but rather contributed to meaningful improvements in how society recognizes, prevents, and responds to domestic violence, while supporting survivors through comprehensive recovery programs that honor their cultural identity and promote their long-term safety, independence, and success.